Hello, it's Jimbo again, and today we're going to be looking at the next team in my team preview for the Overwatch 2022 season, and that's going to be the Atlanta Reign. This team's coming into this season looking pretty good, to be honest. They had a pretty good run last season. They've always been kind of gatekeepery team, but they've never been able to quite crack into the kind of top level of the tournament. They did really well last year at the end of the 2021 season, reaching the finals where they did get destroyed by the Shanghai Dragons because they were just at such a high level compared to everyone else. And they weren't able to match the Shanghai Dragons ball comp, really. They were extremely strong on kind of a rush, Reinhardt composition with Lucio, and I imagine they'll still be strong on that, and that's probably their preferred team comp to be playing, really. So they've always been a strong team, and they have some good players. They're kind of the All-American team nowadays, bar a few players, and they're probably going to be up there this year. So let's start with their team composition. I think it's easier to start with the things they haven't changed, and that's basically their tank line, who've always been solid performers for the Atlanta Reign over the last 2 years. They've been able to provide above average performances to extremely solid performances. Gator especially has always been a very solid main tank, able to provide, a good ability on most main tanks, especially on the Reinhardt, which he's always been known for and is extremely good at, bar when he played Sigma in the end of the 2020 season. But apart from that, he's always been a solid player. Same goes for Hawk, who's always been a solid player on the Atlanta Reign. Very good on the off tanks. I think his Sigma's really good. His Diva's really good, especially. And we'll have to see how he translates to the Overwatch 2 kind of off-tank / main tank hybrid style that I think is going to be taking place. And also how he picks up the Doomfist with all the Doomfist changes that have been going on. Now, I am a bit unsure what to think of this tank line going into Overwatch 2 because they've always been a pretty solid tank duo and they've played together for a long time in Overwatch 1. But going into Overwatch 2, you've kind of got to focus purely on that mechanical skill, especially at the beginning when people are going to be more unsure about how to play it, and also how quickly you can pick up new heroes. I do think having kind of both Gator and Hawk is a good thing to have for the Atlanta Reign, seeing as they'll be able to flex around a bit and decide who plays which heroes if one of them's struggling and things like that. And depending on where the game's going to go, King's Row is probably still going to have Gator on that Reinhardt destroying everyone. But I think a lot of the weight is going to be put on Hawk's shoulders, especially judging by what people have been saying about the alpha. The off tanks are incredibly strong, and we're going to be seeing a lot of probably Doomfist, Sigma, Diva, things like that. And so it's whether or not Hawk can kind of elevate himself from being a very solid off tank to kind of being that carry solo tank that he needs to be. And I'm not entirely sure he'll be able to do that at the moment, but he can prove me wrong, definitely. I have, some faith in him. But will he reach the levels of people like Void, those other Korean off tanks who are incredibly mechanically skilled, as well as having good game sense? We'll have to find out. But other than that, they have a very solid tank line, but nothing mind-blowing, I think. Nothing that's going to be a carry tank line, I feel. But going into their DPS line, I have a lot of faith in their DPS line. They've got a really good DPS line coming into this year. So they've still got Kai, who was always a good player, but I felt like didn't get picked up for an Overwatch League team for quite a while. But once he got picked up into the Atlanta Reign, he's been performing to a really high standard. He is incredibly skilled on the hit scan, and he always does a really impressive job. I do think he has some weaknesses in the fact that he's maybe not as flexible as some other DPS players in terms of the hit scan role, and he's quite a hard hit scan role, so like Widowmaker, McCree, Ashe, things like that. But he hits a lot of shots, so it ends up being pretty good. So we'll have to see how that kind of translates into Overwatch 2, especially his ability to play things like the Sojourn and things like that, and the Soldier. Seeing as Soldier sounds like he's going to be incredibly strong at the moment, unless they change it going into the Overwatch 2 beta. But he's an incredibly good hit scan player, and so we'll have to see how that translates into Overwatch 2. But I do have faith in him, seeing as the game is going to be very kind of skirmishy, aim-based, mechanical skill-based, and Kai definitely has that mechanical skill, so I think it can just be about how he fits into playing the Overwatch 2 and how he works with the team. And I do think they've picked up some good other DPS to kind of complement Kai, right? Because Kai's really good at that hard hit scan role, but he always maybe wasn't as good as being a bit more flexible with things like Tracer and things like that. And so that's where the Venom pickup is looking really good. So Venom was playing for Odyssey in the North American region, I think on high ping, and he absolutely slapped on high ping. So it'll be exciting to see how good he is going into Overwatch 2. Now, I did hear that in the alpha they've nerfed Tracer a bit, so we'll have to see how that holds up, seeing as Tracer doesn't seem to be getting as much playtime. But having kind of that more flexible hit scan player who can flex into a variety of kind of those hit scan flex roles, so like Tracer, the McCree, things like that, is an exciting character to have. And I think it's important in Overwatch 2 seeing as things are a bit up in the air to begin with before kind of solid metas start to develop, you've got to have kind of a range of flexible DPSs who can play that hard hit scan going more into the flex DPS role. And so I think having Kai and Venom as that kind of like well-rounded duo going from the harder hit scan to the like kind of softer hit scan, more like flanky hit scan, it's going to be an interesting combo. And they both are really good players. Additionally, they've also brought Nero in, who's always performed pretty well on whatever teams he's been on. Kind of didn't have that good of a season last year, I feel, being on San Francisco Shock, but the whole San Francisco Shock team kind of struggled last year. But he's always been kind of reliable, and I don't think it was him that was the issue of that team, really. I think they just had kind of, they struggled a bit with the coaching and their team coordination. I mean, they still did really well. They still came fourth. So they got that kind of hang of it, I think, later on in the season, but it took them a while to get that. I think they struggled because they were quite a green team, and they were kind of building the team round, Violet especially, who they never really subbed out, and the team kind of struggled because of that. And they felt like they kind of lost their identity, whereas previously the San Francisco Shock were always the team that were like incredibly well coached, incredibly kind of well coordinated and played impeccably. And that's how they were able to win the previous 2 seasons. But last year they kind of got a bit messy. And I think that's probably because they had kind of had a mixture of fairly new players or players that hadn't been on excellent teams before. But it still didn't mean, I think Nero was one of the better players on that team, especially towards the end. And so it's exciting to see how he'll perform the Atlanta Reign. And I think he'll fit pretty well into the Atlanta Reign, who's kind of feels like a very self-coached team where the team kind of works together. They're not really like a top-down coaching structure, I kind of get the impression. I don't know for sure, but I think they kind of work within the players to coach their team and kind of work together like that. And I think they have a very kind of friendly team vibe, and they all kind of friends with each other and vibe like that. And I think that's kind of a area where Nero will thrive, right? I think he'll appreciate that rather than being kind of having the pressure put on him by kind of a coach telling him what to do all the time and things like that. And so I think it's quite a bit of a different coaching structure from what he would have had in the San Francisco Shock. So we'll have to see how well he does. But he's all really good on the flex DPS. His Pharah is really good. His Echo's really good. His Genji's pretty good. Whether or not he's like, quite as good as someone like a Sparkle, I don't know for sure, because he's never really been able to show that. He's kind of been on a weird selection of teams. But I think this is his season to really shine as that flex DPS. And he's going to be playing quite a lot, alongside Kai. And I think this DPS, trio is honestly one of the DPS lineups coming into Overwatch 2 and the 2022 season. So I'm really excited and looking forward to them. And then finally moving on to the support line. So they've only got 2 supports here. So they're going to be playing all the time. And it's Ojee and Ultraviolet, who have been around the scene for a long time, playing for American Tornado and Redbird Esports for Ultraviolet. But they've been around for a long time. They've been doing really well in contenders, and they've always been amazingly mechanically skilled American DPS players, but they've just been too young essentially. That's why they haven't been picked up. They're both just 18. And I think they're really exciting pickups. So they're probably some of the best Western support players to be picked up. And it's really exciting to see the Atlanta Reign picking them up. But they are just excellent and mechanically skilled. And they've worked together for a while, which is, I think, going to be important going into Overwatch 2, where it looks like the flex support is suffering quite a lot because they just kind of die because they haven't got that much peel from a set off tank or anything like that. And so I think it's important to see that they've gone for that main support, flex support duo only for the Atlanta Reign, rather than having 2 flex supports and a main support, or just 2 flex supports as some teams. And so I think OG is going to be kind of that Brig Lucio player who's going to be peeling for Ultraviolet on the Ana, on the BAP. And I think they're going to be really good together. There's not much else to really say for them, I feel. Just that if you haven't seen them play, you should go and watch some of the Contenders finals. They were really good. And they just know what they're doing. They're incredibly mechanically skilled, and I'm excited to see them on Overwatch 2 supports, and hopefully any new supports that are released for Overwatch 2. And then additionally, they recently added Speedily, who is going to be their 4th DPS player and has been brought in as kind of their further flex DPS. I hear and have seen that he had an amazing Echo. He's been hard grinding Echo, especially. and which is maybe a hero Nero's not quite as good at, so that's probably why they picked him up. And additionally, he's also played with Ultraviolet and Ojee on Atlanta American Tornado. And so they've got a strong core of American Tornado players here who are kind of dominating in contenders. And so it's exciting to see them picked up with a stable tank line like Gator and Hawk, with Kai, who's been around a while now and is exceptionally talented. And we'll see how they blend together. Hopefully they can get higher than, hopefully they can push higher than they have done previously. Because while they've always been good, right, they have kind of struggled to kind of get to that peak position. They always ended up becoming third in the Overwatch 2021 season's tournaments. And I think especially they always struggled against the kind of different play styles that were played by the Eastern teams, the Korean and Chinese teams. And so hopefully they can fix that before going next time, but they're not going to have to play against those teams that much in the tournament. But I think if they want to actually stand a chance to win the Overwatch League 2022 season, they have to kind of, I think, get a bit more stricter with their play style. I think previously they've always got quite a scrappy play style, and I think it comes from their coaching, where they feel like a very player-led coaching team. And I think sometimes the reason they lose is because they're really good and really well organized, but they're not quite the level of some of the Eastern teams like the Shanghai Dragons, who were, incredibly well drilled, incredibly precise in how they carried out dives and things like that. And they were able to pull apart the kind of brawl composition of the Atlanta Reign. And I think that's the main thing I feel is Atlanta Reign was able to carry themselves last year by being exceptional at the brawl composition. But now moving into Overwatch 2, where you've got one less tank, brawl's a bit weaker. It's still viable, and they'll be excellent at it, I imagine, still. But they might struggle with it a little bit, and it might not be viable the entire time. So I think they're going to have to really work on how they're going to run their dive compositions, how they're going to streamline that going forward. And that is up to Gator and Hawk to be able to do that. I think their DPS line's excellent, their support line's excellent, and so it's up to Gator and Hawk to kind of be able to show that they can flex onto those dive heroes, not just the brawl. And I think they also need to work on their team coordination that way. I think that's what struggled a little bit with, I think that's why they were so good at brawl especially, is it's like, very simply, you just run at people and call a target, and they're able to do that. And they struggled a little bit with the dive, which requires a lot more coordination and things like that. So it doesn't mean they can't do it, but I think they will. And I think also the fact they've got a much more English speaking team now, rather than before they had quite a few. They had, Pelican and Edison and Iris, who were Korean. And so therefore there was maybe a bit of a language barrier. So I think the communication is going to be probably the best it's ever been. And that's exciting. So I think they're going to be a good team this year. There's no doubt about that. They came second last year, and they've always been a good team. But I think it's whether or not they can push themselves to that kind of first, second, third spot, like regularly, and keep that consistency high. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, stay tuned for another video. Please like and subscribe. See ya.